Most people think Bigfoot sightings are just jokes or campfire stories until something steps out of the dark and proves them wrong. These aren't legends, they're true Bigfoot stories that are too disturbing to ignore. Moments where normal days turned into nightmares no one could explain. Once you hear these accounts, you'll understand why some witnesses never went back to living life the same way again. This hunter would instantly regret his decision to shoot at Bigfoot. The Sasquatch started hunting him for years, taking every chance to horrifically destroy his life and torture him like he'd never experienced. This is the true story of how Hunter Bram Oakes got brutally abused by Bigfoot. On March 8, 2017, Bram Oakes crashed through the undergrowth, alert to every snapped twig and shifting shadow around him. Every rustle in the trees, every low thump on the forest floor made him jerk his head, searching for movement. His rifle clutched against his chest, he scanned the dense underbrush. Minutes after the sharp crack of his shot, he could still hear something heavier moving in the woods, a series of thuds that didn't match his own footsteps, uneven and deliberate. He said that he didn't know what he'd fired at, but he knew it had been massive, upright, and wrong in ways his mind refused to process. Bram realized with a sinking feeling that he'd veered far off the marked trail. The orange blazes that usually guided hikers through this section of the Cascade foothills were nowhere to be seen. And now he could hear it, subtle at first, then unmistakable. Heavy breathing and branches breaking rhythmically behind him, following his path. He'd been moving on pure adrenaline, putting distance between himself and whatever he'd encountered, and in doing so had plunged himself deeper into unfamiliar territory. Every instinct screamed that he was being hunted. Normally, being lost would terrify him, but right now, the unseen presence closing in scared him far more. He stopped to catch his breath, leaning against the rough bark of a cedar. Then he heard it again. Something large was moving parallel to his path. Not behind him, beside him, maybe 50 yards to his right. The sound was rhythmic, deliberate, the soft compression of moss and soil under significant weight. They came in a steady cadence, unhurried but purposeful. Why would something that size choose to shadow him instead of attack? He pushed off the tree and started moving again, faster now, his boots slipping on wet roots and loose stones. The parallel movement continued, matching his pace. When he sped up, it sped up. When he slowed to navigate a fallen log, it slowed too. Bram's eyes darted to his right, searching the fog-shrouded trees for any sign of the follower. Branches swayed in the mist, but not from wind. The air was still. They moved as if something massive had just passed through them, displacing the foliage with its bulk. He caught glimpses of disturbance, the aftershocks of movement, but never the source. How long had it been watching him before he even noticed? And then the footfalls stopped. Bram froze mid-step as silence flooded back in, thick and oppressive. He held his breath and tried to listen, but not a sound nor a rustle could be heard. It was as if the entire forest had been placed on mute. Then, from somewhere ahead and to his left, came a sound that made his blood run cold. A deep, resonant knock echoed through the trees. Someone, or something, had struck a tree with tremendous force, and the sound carried through the fog like a signal. Bram's grip tightened on his rifle. He turned slowly toward the source of the knock, scanning the tree line. Before he could process what he'd heard, another knock answered from his left. This one was slightly different in tone, deeper and more resonant, as if struck against a larger tree. The two sounds formed a pattern, a call and response that framed Bram's position between them. His throat went dry as he realized that he was being bracketed. Whatever was out here, there was more than one, and they were coordinating. He broke into a jog, no longer caring about stealth. The rifle bounced against his shoulder as he navigated the uneven terrain, ducking under low branches and vaulting over moss-covered logs. Behind him, the knocking stopped, but the silence that replaced it was worse. It meant they no longer needed to signal because they knew exactly where he was. How many were tracking him now? He stumbled over something and nearly fell, catching himself against a tree at the last second. When he looked down, his stomach dropped. There's a footprint. It was pressed deep into the soft earth near a creek bed, the edges still sharp and fresh. Water was beginning to seep into the depression from the saturated ground, but the print couldn't have been more than minutes old. Bram crouched beside it, his hands trembling as he held them up for scale. He said that the print was enormous, at least 18 inches long, maybe more. It was vaguely human in shape, a heel, an arch, 5 distinct toe impressions at the front. But the proportions were all wrong. The toes were longer and more spread out than any human foot, and the depth of the impression suggested something incredibly heavy. Bram estimated at least 500 pounds, possibly more, based on how deeply the print had sunk into the soil. The ground around the print showed signs of recent disturbance. Smaller depressions marked where the creature had shifted its weight, and a line of similar prints led away into the underbrush, each one spaced roughly 6 feet apart. The stride length was impossible for any human. If it could cover 6-foot strides so easily, how quickly could it overtake him? Bram's rationalizations collapsed as he realized that this was something that shouldn't exist, but clearly did, and it was close. He stood up slowly, his eyes following the line of tracks. They didn't lead away from him. They led in a wide arc that curved back toward the direction he'd been heading. The creature wasn't just following him. It was herding him, guiding him deeper into the forest. A branch snapped somewhere behind him, close enough that Bram spun around with his rifle raised. His finger hovered over the trigger as he scanned the fog-shrouded trees. Shadows moved within shadows, shapes that could have been tree trunks or something else entirely. His heart pounded so hard he could feel it in his temples. Nothing emerged from the mist, but Bram said that he could feel eyes on him and sensed the weight of attention focused on his every move. How long had it been watching him without making a sound? He needed to get out of here. He needed to find high ground, get his bearings, figure out where the nearest road or trail was. He said that at that moment, staying in the low ground, in the thick vegetation where visibility was measured in yards, was suicide. Bram turned and started climbing, scrambling up a steep slope covered in loose gravel and exposed roots. The climb was brutal. His boots slipped on the wet stones, and he had to use his free hand to grab onto roots and pull himself upward. The rifle made everything awkward, but he refused to sling it across his back because he needed it ready. Behind him, he could hear something moving through the underbrush, keeping pace with his ascent, but staying out of sight. If it was staying hidden, what was it waiting for? Bram was halfway up the slope when a massive rock slammed into the ridge beside him. The impact was tremendous, sending shards of stone and dirt spraying across his face. He said that the rock was likely the size of a basketball, and it had been thrown with enough force to embed itself partially in the hillside. Bram's head snapped toward the source, and for just a moment, he saw it. A huge silhouette stood at the base of the slope, partially obscured by a fallen pine. It was massive, easily 8 or 9 feet tall, with shoulders so broad they seemed to fill the space between the trees. The shape was distinctly bipedal, standing fully upright with arms that hung past where its knees would be. Even in the fog and shadows, Bram could make out the bulk of its frame, the power contained in its stance. Then it moved, withdrawing behind the fallen pine with a speed that seemed impossible for something so large. If it could move that fast, how close could it get before he even heard it? Another rock came hurtling up the slope, this one even closer. It struck a tree trunk inches from Bram's head with a crack like a gunshot. Splinters of bark exploded outward, and Bram threw himself flat against the hillside. He twisted around, bringing the rifle to bear, and fired down the slope in the direction the rocks had come from. The muzzle flash lit up the fog for a split second, and the report echoed through the valley, rolling away into the distance. Bram worked the bolt and chambered another round. He paused to assess the results of the shot, but there was no audible vocalization indicating injury, nor indication of a body moving. If the shot didn't deter it, what would? Bram scrambled the rest of the way up the slope and hauled himself over the ridge. On the other side, the terrain leveled out into a stretch of old-growth forest, the trees spaced farther apart and the underbrush less dense. According to him, visibility improved to maybe 50 yards, though the fog still clung to everything. He didn't waste any chances and started running. The rifle felt like it weighed 100 pounds, but he kept it clutched tight against his chest. Behind him, he could hear movement starting again. If it had clearer sightlines now, would it change how it pursued him? He said that it was following him, but not chasing yet. It had the same steady, deliberate pace it had maintained since his nightmare began. Thinking about it again, Bram said that the creature didn't seem to be in a hurry, and it didn't need to be. It knew this forest far better than Bram did, knew every trail and creek and hiding spot. It could afford to be patient, but Bram couldn't. He pushed himself harder, ignoring the burning in his legs and the stitch developing in his side. He vaulted over a fallen log and nearly lost his footing on the other side, windmilling his arms to keep his balance. That's when he heard it clearly for the first time. A low, resonant growl rolled through the trees, so deep and powerful that Bram felt it vibrate in his chest cavity. It wasn't the growl of a bear or a cougar. Those were sounds he knew intimately. This was something else, something that resonated at a frequency that bypassed his ears and went straight to the most primitive part of his brain, the part that remembered when humans weren't the apex predators. Bram crashed through a wall of thick brush, thorns tearing at his jacket and exposed skin. He didn't care. He said that during that time, his rational mind had completely surrendered to panic, and his body operated on pure survival instinct. Behind him, the pursuit continued. They didn't crash through obstacles. They flowed around them. They didn't waste energy on speed. They simply maintained pressure, likely knowing that Bram would eventually exhaust himself. And he was exhausting himself. He said his legs felt like lead that time, and his vision had started to narrow at the edges. He'd been running on adrenaline for what felt like hours, though it couldn't have been more than 30 or 40 minutes since he'd fired that first shot. If he collapsed now, how long would it take them to reach him? Bram forced himself to slow down, to think. Blind panic would kill him just as surely as whatever was out here. He needed a plan, needed to find defensible ground or a hiding spot, somewhere he could catch his breath and figure out his next move. His eyes scanned the forest ahead, looking for anything that might offer shelter. There, an eroded bank where a creek had undercut the soil, creating a hollow space beneath a tangle of exposed roots. It wasn't much, but it was something. Bram altered his course and made for the bank, sliding down the muddy slope and squeezing himself into the narrow space. The roots formed a natural cage above him, and the overhang provided cover from above. He thought that if he stayed quiet and still, maybe whatever was following him would just pass by. But if it had been tracking him this precisely, could hiding even work? He pressed himself against the cold earth, trying to control his breathing. The rifle lay across his lap, safety off, finger resting alongside the trigger guard. He stared out through the gaps in the roots, watching the forest for movement. For several minutes, nothing happened. The forest remained still, wrapped in fog and silence. Bram began to hope that maybe he'd lost them, but then slow, heavy footsteps approached from upslope. He said that the footsteps were deliberate, confident, the sound of something that knew exactly where it was going. They came closer, each impact of foot against earth sending a small vibration through the ground that Bram could feel through his back. The cadence was unmistakably bipedal, but the spacing and weight were all wrong for a human. If it walked like a human but weighed far more, what exactly was closing in? The footsteps stopped directly above his hiding spot. Bram could hear breathing now, deep and steady. He held perfectly still, not daring to move even a fraction of an inch. Through the tangle of roots above him, he could see a shape, huge and dark, blocking out what little light filtered through the canopy. A long branch suddenly poked through one of the openings in the root structure, testing the hollow space. The branch moved methodically, probing different gaps, as if whatever held it was trying to determine the size and depth of the cavity. Bram pressed himself flatter against the earth, making himself as small as possible. The branch withdrew, and Bram heard a new sound: sniffing. Bram realized with horror that he was probably leaving an olfactory trail a mile wide. He was soaked with sweat, his clothes were torn and bleeding sap from the brush he'd crashed through, and he'd been handling his rifle with bare hands. Any predator with a decent sense of smell would have no trouble tracking him. If it could smell him this clearly, what stopped it from reaching in and dragging him out? However, after what felt like an eternity, the footsteps moved on, heading downstream along the creek bed. Bram waited, forcing himself to remain motionless, even though every fiber of his being wanted to bolt from the hiding spot. Just as he was about to risk moving, he heard something that made his blood freeze. Another set of footsteps, lighter but still heavy, approaching from downstream. From the opposite direction, there were at least two of them, and they were coordinating their search pattern. One had walked past his hiding spot to continue downstream, while the other circled back from below. They were boxing him in, ensuring he couldn't slip away unnoticed. If this was a coordinated search, how many more might be nearby? The second set of footsteps passed within yards of his position, close enough that Bram could hear the soft compression of mosses beneath enormous feet. He caught a glimpse through the roots. A massive leg, covered in dark reddish-brown hair, muscles shifting beneath the fur with each step. The leg was easily as thick as his torso, and the foot that came down was broad and elongated, with toes that gripped the earth like fingers. Then it was gone, moving upstream to join the first creature. If they reunited, would they double back to recheck his position? Bram waited another 5 minutes, his muscles screaming from being held in such a cramped, tense position. When he finally convinced himself that both creatures had moved far enough away, he began to slowly, carefully extract himself from the hollow. Every movement was calculated, every shift of weight deliberate. He couldn't afford to make a sound. He crawled out into the creek bed and crouched there for a moment, listening. The forest had returned to its normal ambient sounds. Birds calling in the distance, the rustle of small animals in the underbrush, the whisper of wind through the canopy. It felt safe, but Bram knew better than to trust that feeling. He needed to move, and he needed to move smart. Staying low wasn't working. The creatures could track him too easily through the dense vegetation. He needed to get to higher ground, somewhere with better visibility, where he could see them coming. Bram started moving perpendicular to the creek, heading toward what he hoped was a ridgeline. But would climbing again just expose him to a better vantage point for them? The climb was exhausting. His legs felt like rubber, and his hands shook from a combination of adrenaline crash and physical exhaustion. He'd burned through his body's reserves, and now he was running on fumes. But he forced himself to keep moving, using trees and rocks to pull himself upward. As he climbed, Bram caught a glimpse of something that made him pause. Through a gap in the trees, maybe 100 yards to his left, he saw it clearly for the first time. The creature stood on a rocky outcrop, fully visible in a shaft of sunlight that had broken through the fog. It was enormous, at least 9 feet tall, possibly more, with a body that seemed impossibly broad and powerful. Its fur was a deep reddish brown, thick and shaggy, covering a frame that suggested tremendous strength. The head was massive, sitting on shoulders so wide they seemed almost grotesque. The legs were thick and muscular, built for power rather than speed, and it was looking directly at him. Even from this distance, Bram could see the eyes, dark and intelligent, tracking his movements with an awareness that was deeply unsettling. This wasn't the blank stare of an animal operating on instinct. This was focused attention, the gaze of something that was thinking, evaluating, making decisions. What exactly had locked onto him with that level of intent? Bram raised his rifle, bringing the scope to his eye. Through the magnification, the creature's features became even more distinct. The face was a disturbing blend of ape and something else, something that didn't fit into any category Bram knew. The brow ridge was pronounced, the jaw heavy and powerful, but there was an expressiveness to the features that went beyond animal. The creature tilted its head slightly, as if curious about what Bram was doing. Then, with a speed that seemed impossible for something so large, it moved. One moment it was standing on the outcrop, fully exposed. The next, it had dropped behind the rocks and vanished from sight. Where had something that size gone so quickly? Bram fired anyway, the rifle bucking against his shoulder. The bullet struck the rock where the creature had been standing, sending chips of stone flying. He worked the bolt and fired again and again, pumping rounds into the outcrop in a desperate attempt to hit something, anything. The magazine ran dry. Bram lowered the rifle, his ears ringing from the shots, and fumbled for another magazine from his jacket pocket. His hands were shaking so badly he nearly dropped it, but he managed to reload and chamber a fresh round. Silence settled over the forest once more. Bram scanned the outcrop through his scope, looking for any sign of the creature, but there was nothing. It was as if it had simply ceased to exist the moment it dropped behind those rocks. Then, from somewhere much closer than the outcrop, came a sound that would haunt Bram for the rest of his life. A roar. It wasn't the roar of a bear or a big cat. It was something else entirely, layered and resonant, with harmonics that seemed to vibrate at multiple frequencies simultaneously. The sound was so powerful that Bram felt it in his bones, felt it rattle his teeth and compress his chest. It was a sound designed to terrify, to paralyze, to announce the presence of something at the absolute top of the food chain. And it was very close. Bram spun around, bringing the rifle up, and saw it charging toward him through the trees. The creature moved with a speed that defied its size, covering ground in long, powerful strides. Trees shook as it brushed past them, and the earth seemed to tremble beneath its weight. Bram fired, but the creature flinched but didn't stop. He fired again, and this time he was certain he'd hit it. He saw the impact, saw the creature's shoulder jerk backward from the bullet's force, but it barely slowed down. A massive arm swung out as the creature passed within feet of Bram's position. He felt the displacement of air, felt the wind from that swing stir his hair. If the creature had wanted to hit him, it could have, easily. But it hadn't. It had deliberately missed, coming close enough to terrify, but not to harm. The creature continued past him, crashing down the slope he'd just climbed, and disappeared into the thick vegetation below. Bram stood frozen, his rifle still raised, his mind struggling to process what had just happened. It had charged him and came close enough to kill him. But why didn't it? Bram looked around frantically, trying to get his bearings. The fog had thickened again, reducing visibility. He had no idea which direction led to the nearest road or trail. He was completely disoriented, exhausted, and running low on ammunition. He had maybe 10 rounds left, and he'd already proven that bullets weren't much of a deterrent against these things. How long could he last with so little left? He needed to find shelter, somewhere defensible where he could hold out until daylight improved and he could figure out where he was. Bram started moving again, this time angling toward what looked like clearer terrain ahead. The trees were thinning out, and he could see what appeared to be old structures through the fog. Was he heading toward safety, or another trap? As he got closer, Bram realized he'd stumbled onto an abandoned logging site. The place was covered in moss and vegetation, slowly being reclaimed by the forest, but some of the metal frames were still intact. Bram made for a massive piece of equipment that had fallen onto its side and now created a sheltered space beneath its bulk. He crawled into the darkness under the machine, pressing himself against the cold metal and damp earth. From this position, he had a limited view of the clearing, but was mostly hidden from sight. How long could he stay concealed here? The clearing remained quiet for several minutes. Bram's breathing gradually slowed, and his heart rate began to return to something approaching normal. Maybe he'd actually lost them this time, or the old logging site was outside their territory, and they wouldn't follow him there. But then he heard the familiar footsteps. Bram peered out through a gap in the machinery and saw a massive shape moving between the rusted equipment. The creature was examining the area, its head turning from side to side as it scanned the clearing. It paused at each piece of machinery, sniffing, listening, searching. It was hunting him methodically, checking every possible hiding spot. Bram held his breath as the creature approached the loader. The creature stopped beside his hiding place. Bram could hear its breathing, could smell its scent, earthy and wild, like moss and cedar mixed with something musky and animal. The smell was overwhelming in the confined space, making his eyes water. Metal groaned above him. The creature was climbing onto the loader, its weight causing the entire structure to shift slightly. Bram pressed himself flatter against the ground, his heart hammering so hard he was certain the creature could hear it. A huge shadow appeared at the opening where Bram had crawled in. The creature had bent down, its massive head silhouetted against the gray light of the clearing. Bram could see the outline of its face, the pronounced brow, the broad nose, the powerful jaw. It was looking directly at him. For several seconds, neither moved. Bram's finger tightened on the rifle's trigger, ready to fire if the creature reached in for him. But it didn't. It simply looked, studying him with an intensity that was deeply unnerving. Then it straightened up and moved away, its footsteps receding across the clearing. Bram didn't move. He couldn't. His muscles had locked up from tension and fear, and his mind was racing. Why hadn't it grabbed him? It had clearly seen him, or at least known he was there. So why had it walked away? The answer came in the form of new sounds, lighter footsteps, but still heavy, approaching from a different direction, and then vocalizations, low and rhythmic, a pattern of sounds that was clearly communication. The creatures were talking to each other. The vocalizations continued for several minutes, the sounds moving around the clearing as the creatures communicated. Bram tried to count the distinct voices. He identified at least 3, maybe 5. According to him, one was deeper and more resonant, the others slightly higher in pitch. They seemed to be discussing something, debating perhaps, making decisions about what to do next. Finally, the sounds faded. The footsteps moved away from the clearing, heading back into the forest. When he finally crawled out from under the loader, the clearing was empty. No sign of the creatures, no movement in the trees. But Bram knew they were out there, watching, waiting. He needed to move, but he needed to move smart. The clearing offered too much open space, too much exposure. He needed to get back into the forest, but into an area with better visibility than the dense undergrowth he'd been struggling through. Bram spotted what looked like a game trail leading out of the clearing, heading in a direction that felt like it might be east. He knew that east meant downslope, and downslope eventually meant water, which could lead him to civilization. He started down the trail, moving as quietly as he could manage. He'd been in the field for over 6 hours now, most of it spent in a state of high stress and physical exertion. He needed food, water, and rest, but none of those were options right now. The trail began to climb, winding up a boulder field where massive stones lay scattered like toys dropped by a giant. Bram scrambled upward, using his hands and knees, the rifle slung across his back now. Behind him, he could hear a creature climbing as well, its movements confident and sure despite the treacherous terrain. Bram glanced back and immediately wished he hadn't. The creature was maybe 30 yards behind him, climbing the boulder field in long, powerful strides. It moved with an efficiency that made Bram's scrambling look pathetic by comparison, placing its hands and feet with precision, never hesitating, never slipping. And it was looking right at him, its dark eyes locked onto his with an intensity that was absolutely terrifying. Bram reached a ledge and pulled himself up, his arms shaking from the effort. He unslung his rifle and turned, bringing it to bear on the creature below, and he fired. The bullet struck the creature in the upper chest, and Bram saw the impact, saw the fur ripple, saw the creature's body jerk backward from the force. But instead of falling or retreating, the creature simply stopped climbing. It looked down at where the bullet had hit, then back up at Bram. And in that moment, Bram saw something in its expression that chilled him more than any roar or charge could have. The creature's lips pulled back, revealing massive teeth, not the fangs of a carnivore, but large, flat molars designed for grinding, with prominent canines that were still formidable. The creature surged up the boulder field with a speed that seemed impossible. It closed the distance between them in seconds, its massive arms reaching, grabbing, pulling itself upward with terrifying efficiency. Bram tried to run, but before he could, other creatures showed themselves. They closed in from multiple sides, not attacking, but positioning themselves to block his path to the river. Bram spun, bringing his rifle up, his finger tightening on the trigger. But the creatures didn't advance. They simply stood there, one on each side of him. And then the larger one, the one that was chasing him, raised one massive arm and pointed, slowly, deliberately, toward the deep forest behind him. The gesture was unmistakable, universal in its meaning. Go and do not return. Bram understood. This was the boundary. The creatures had herded him to the edge of their territory, had brought him to the threshold of safety, but they were making it clear that crossing back into their domain would not be tolerated. This was a warning, a final message delivered with a clarity that transcended language. Bram lowered his rifle and started toward the river, moving slowly at first, then faster as the reality of his escape sank in. He waded into the cold water, reaching the far bank, and hauled himself out, collapsing onto the rocky shore. For several minutes, he simply lay there, gasping, his body shaking from exhaustion and cold and the aftermath of adrenaline. Bram forced himself to stand and started walking toward the bridge. And as he reached the bridge, Bram turned to look back at the forest one last time. The trees stood silent and still, giving no indication of what lurked within their depths. Bram Oakes kept walking, never looking back, carrying the weight of those secrets with him into a world that would never understand what he had survived.
Okay, I just heard another sound.
Maria, we're not picking up anything via the seismic sensors, either.
Something's moving here.
Yeah, something moving across the screen right here.
It was March 11, 2024, deep in the wet silence of Washington's Olympic National Forest, where fog settles low and radio signals vanish within minutes of the road. That morning, a motion sensor blinked to life. Hours later, a new video appeared online. What it showed would soon divide everyone who watched it. The clip lasted 18 seconds. At first, it showed only static night vision grain, the faint hiss of wind, and a campfire's reflected glow across a plastic tarp. Then, from beyond the creek, a broad, upright shape crossed the frame. Its movements were slow and deliberate, partially obscured by drifting fog, before it turned and disappeared behind a ridge. A heartbeat later, the recording cut to black. Initial reactions were muted, but re-uploads began spreading across Reddit and YouTube within hours. A pattern soon formed in how people labeled the reposts, each one hinting at survival and encounter, rather than simple observation. By the next evening, thousands had watched the clip, yet Ellison himself could not be reached. The silence where his voice should have been grew louder with each unanswered call. Mark Ellison, 50, was a former fire tower ranger who spent 2 decades across the Olympic Peninsula. Known for his precision, he logged every route and weather shift, except, perhaps, the one that mattered most. He lived alone near Forks, where the forest pressed close to his property. After leaving his post, he ran a small channel focused on camping safety and wildlife behavior, field notes more than entertainment. He ignored the folklore around him, documenting only what could be measured. The device he used on his final trip was a compact infrared trail camera that automatically sent every recording to offsite storage. Early March 2024 brought steady rain to the upper Sol Duc drainage. Rain carried the smell of iron from wet bark. Mark Ellison had planned a 3-day trip to test a hybrid solar battery trail camera under dense canopy. He drove from his home in Forks and parked off Highway 101 near Fairholme before hiking in on foot. His plan was simple: set 2 cameras at separate clearings, then return once the data uploaded. Each note he recorded felt routine, until it didn't. GPS tracker and voice recordings showed a routine trip, He checked in at precise intervals, 3:12 p.m., noting barometric pressure, 5:40 p.m., mentioning drizzle. He reached camp before sunset, near a tributary of the Salduc River. On day 2, he moved between camera sites, covering nearly 5 miles before returning to camp by late afternoon. His last coordinates placed him a quarter mile from his tent. At 7:52 that evening, Ellison sent a voice note about rising wind and plans to leave early. The message uploaded, then the connection dropped. No further transmissions came after 8 p.m. At 8:41 p.m., his trail camera detected motion. It recorded 18 seconds of night vision footage before uploading to the cloud, the same clip showing a tall shape near the riverbank. Despite the valley's notoriously weak service, short bursts of connection often occurred along ridgelines, which could explain how the file transmitted successfully. Yet the file was perfect, too perfect. The successful upload confirmed equipment was functioning, yet nothing followed. The cameras stayed silent through the night. If the camera was alive, something else in the valley was too. When Ellison failed to return, his sister reported him overdue on March 14th. She had assumed he'd extended the trip because of persistent rain and poor road conditions, but after several unanswered messages, she contacted authorities. Search teams later found his vehicle locked at the trailhead. Teams advanced along the drainage using standard search grids. Near his camp, they found the tent intact, sleeping bag rolled, and cooking gear neatly stacked. His backpack rested under the tarp with 1 day's rations left. The radio was powered off, its batteries removed. Only his phone was missing. The charger remained coiled beside a full battery pack, suggesting he'd taken it with him before vanishing into the forest. A recovered set of boot impressions led away from camp for roughly 40 yards before blending into a patch of wet moss where tracking became unreliable. The path ran parallel to the stream in the same direction as the camera's recorded footage. Was he following something or being led? Searchers found no signs of struggle, no animal traces, and no evidence of sudden runoff or slope collapse. Technicians found Ellison's GPS trail ended abruptly at 8:02 p.m., less than 40 minutes before his camera recorded motion. Investigators blamed either drained batteries or a signal drop in rough terrain. His smartwatch kept transmitting 40 minutes longer, logging movement after the tracker went dark. 2 devices, 2 endpoints, no clear link. The footage drew attention only after his family shared his details online, connecting his name to the viral clip. Search teams expanded their radius but found nothing new. Rain erased traces. Only his gear and a field notebook remained. The last entry dated March 3rd, stopping mid-sentence, pen lifted mid-stroke. Frame-by-frame playback revealed more detail. The object's outline extended nearly 7 feet above ground level when scaled against visible branches. The infrared exposure, usually harsh on warm objects, registered the figure several degrees cooler than its surroundings. That single anomaly became the focus of countless breakdowns. Under normal conditions, a living subject moving through cold air would appear warmer on infrared. The inverse pattern suggested heavy insulation, either natural or layered, capable of masking body heat. But what kind of insulation makes something colder than the forest itself? Colorized conversions circulated across multiple forums, each exaggerating contrast in different ways. One enhanced frame showed a faint reflection on the lower left, 2 consecutive frames in which a smaller irregular shape appeared. Some called it a sensor echo or a lens reflection from fog droplets, while others saw the hint of another crouched figure. No one could agree on the scale, and no one could explain why it moved when nothing else did. Professionals with backgrounds in drone and wildlife imaging weighed in. A group of remote sensing students from Oregon State University attempted to reconstruct the camera's parameters based on the embedded EXIF metadata. Coordinates placed the scene on the south side of the Salduc River, roughly 2 miles from the nearest service road. Temperature metadata suggested ambient conditions near 43 degrees Fahrenheit, consistent with Ellison's earlier logs. The camera angle matched one of the test positions Ellison had described to fellow hobbyists weeks earlier. In a comment preserved through cached archives, he mentioned a spot overlooking a narrow stream bend with enough open ground to track deer movement. That detail aligned with the topography visible in the clip, a sloping bank descending into a shallow channel bordered by alder and cedar. He'd mapped it himself. He'd walked that ground before. So why did it look different through the lens? What puzzled analysts was the clean upload timestamp. The file's creation and transfer times showed no signs of delay or corruption. If the device had malfunctioned or been damaged, the upload would have stalled or produced a partial file. Instead, the connection remained steady for the full duration, meaning the camera completed its data queue without interruption. Perfect transmission from a valley known for dead zones. Technicians studying the pixel patterns noticed a faint flicker in the upper right quadrant between frames 241 and 245, less than a quarter of a second in real time. When brightness levels were equalized, a diffused light signature appeared, consistent with a brief reflection from a wet surface or metallic object. It moved counter to the camera's natural light gradient, suggesting an independent source of reflection rather than random interference. Something had caught light where no light should have been. Theories diverged. One camp claimed it was a visual echo from the moving figure. Another insisted it was the partial outline of a second body entering the periphery. A third argued for atmospheric distortion common in humid forest air when illuminated by infrared. No theory could fully explain why the reflected area appeared cooler than both background and subject, reversing expected thermal hierarchy. Independent field photographers recreated similar setups using identical hardware. Most achieved plausible silhouettes using heavy clothing or insulated suits, yet none could replicate the precise temperature inversion shown in the file. The simulated subjects always registered warmer than the forest floor, even when soaked or coated with mud. To match the readings, an object would need either a heat-reflective surface or extremely low core temperature inconsistent with a living human, or it would need to have been there so long it had become part of the cold itself. Satellite imagery confirmed that the area around the recorded coordinates contained deep canopy and water channels known for producing cold air pockets. In such zones, temperature gradients could shift abruptly over short distances. Analysts tried mapping air density changes to explain the flickering outlines, yet the footage's stability argued against wind interference. Every tree in the frame held still. Only the moving figure showed motion distortion, as if everything else knew to stay frozen. As online interest grew, various users claimed to possess clearer copies. Most were filtered versions of the same source, compressed and re-uploaded under misleading titles. The original remained on a cloud server associated with Ellison's account until it was mirrored by multiple websites. A retired wildlife biologist from the Pacific Northwest Research Station reviewed the clip at normal speed and noted proportion ratios unusual for any known animal. The limb length appeared human, but the forward pitch of the torso and restricted arm swing suggested limited shoulder rotation, a trait found in large quadrupeds when forced upright. Combined with the even pacing and apparent mass, the profile did not match typical human gait. It walked like something learning how. Forums filled with motion tracking overlays. Volunteers marked joint points and stride intervals. The results varied, but shared one oddity. The stride distance measured consistently, longer than that of an average adult male. The figure's head never turned toward the camera, despite the obvious illumination shift when it crossed the clearing. It moved as if aware of the light source, but indifferent to it, or as if it had done this before. A few users highlighted the final 3 frames where the shape began to descend behind a slope. The camera registered a brief drop in ambient contrast, followed by a pulse of interference resembling static. Some mistook it for a system error, but file diagnostics confirmed intentional cutoff. The device terminated recording precisely at the standard 18-second mark, meaning the motion trigger had completed its cycle rather than failed. It ended exactly when it was supposed to. Nothing malfunctioned, nothing broke. It simply stopped watching. When investigators later cross-checked the metadata with official survey maps, the The coordinates aligned with a ridge overlooking a narrow tributary of the Sol Duc River. The distance to the nearest access point measured just over 2 miles, accessible only by foot and far from campsites. Despite meticulous analysis, no consensus emerged. To some, the video showed a hoax performed with precision equipment. To others, it was a rare example of an unknown presence moving through one of the most isolated valleys in the region. The only certainty came from the data itself. The camera functioned exactly as designed, recorded at stable temperature and time, and transmitted the file without error. But certainty isn't the same as truth. By the second week after the leak, breakdown threads dominated discussion boards. Digital forensics groups produced papers describing possible causes, ranging from double exposure to sensor misread. Yet each hypothesis left one constant unexplained: the secondary reflection that appeared in those 2 brief frames. It was there, unmistakable, yet no one could say what it was or why it moved opposite the main subject. Some things defy focus no matter how many times you replay them. When search teams reached the coordinates tied to the footage, the clearing matched every contour visible in the clip. The slope, the stream bend, even the distinctive split trunk on the left side of the frame, all present. But the primary trail camera that had recorded the event was gone. Only its nylon mounting strap and a length of solar wire remained, both ends frayed but not cut. The ground beneath the tree showed no signs of struggle, only a compressed patch of soil where the camera housing should have rested. Something had taken it gently. 200 yards from the site, Ellison's backup camera remained active. It captured no visuals, only 8 seconds of heavy impacts, a low hum, then static at 8:42 p.m., 1 minute after the main clip. Analysts noted an electromagnetic-type spike, as if something nearby generated interference. His vehicle sat untouched at the Fairholme trailhead, keys gone but supplies intact. Hours after the footage spread, forensic users discovered a second save at 9:03 p.m., over 20 minutes after all devices went dark. Service in the valley was poor, yet deliberate access was clear. The file had been reopened. The question was, by whom? This discrepancy became the first tangible contradiction in the case. If Ellison had left camp before 8 p.m. and the footage auto-uploaded at 8:41, who interacted with the file at 9:03? Investigators tested the hypothesis of an automated server sync, but logs from the manufacturer's database showed no queued retries or firmware updates at that time. Whatever process modified the file had occurred locally, not through routine background operations. Further inspection revealed that the 9:03 record shared the same checksum as the original, ruling out content alteration. The change involved metadata only, consistent with a resave command triggered when a user previews or reopens the file, as if someone had been reviewing what they just recorded. That small gap, 22 minutes between upload and modification, became the focal point for both official investigators and online sleuths. Some analysts noted that minor server clock drift or timestamp desynchronization could technically account for the discrepancy, though the lack of corresponding network activity kept the anomaly under scrutiny. Searchers on the ground had found no footprints beyond the creek, no equipment suggesting Ellison retrieved the camera himself, and no evidence of wildlife interference capable of pressing buttons or powering devices. Yet the file's behavior implied human interaction, or something that understood how humans interact. Forums began speculating that someone else had been in the area, possibly another hiker or a passerby who found the camera and triggered a manual upload while checking its contents. But weather records showed heavy rain moving through the region that night, reducing visibility and making travel off established routes unlikely. Rangers also confirmed no other camping permits had been issued within a 5-mile radius during that period. No one else should have been there. So who touched the camera at 9:03? 3 nights after the original clip spread, a second version surfaced on a small video mirror under an unverified account. The username matched none of Ellison's, yet the description claimed it was a restored copy from the trail camera's SD card. Uploaded just after midnight on March 14th, between official searches and the final volunteer sweep, It seemed deliberately timed. The checksum differed slightly, indicating a new encode. This version ran 5 seconds longer. Amid static and interference, a faint shape appeared, elongated, bent, dragging something downslope. The feed ended in a smear of noise and blackout. 5 seconds that changed everything. Video forensic groups analyzed the new clip and found no edits. Only breaks typical of an interrupted upload resumed under weak signal. The file acted as if a frozen transfer had later continued from cached data, suggesting the added segment always existed but failed to send the first time. The camera had seen more than anyone realized. Its block-based system could store incomplete frames for later upload, yet no one could explain how those missing packets resurfaced 3 days later, or who held the physical card needed to retrieve them. By then, search teams had confirmed one fact: the primary camera was gone. Compression analysis deepened the puzzle. The static at the start of the added sequence displayed a symmetrical frequency band, evidence of re-encoding, not external noise. Experts described it as a signature left when damaged frames are rebuilt by automated correction software. The recovered images were cleaner than they should have been, almost too intact for a device that had supposedly gone offline. Someone had worked to restore them. But why? Viewers who enhanced the footage noticed a series of faint flickers along the right edge, forming a repeating pattern consistent with a swinging light source. When motion tracked, the rhythm aligned closely with a bipedal gait, alternating at just under 2 strides per second. The dragging form appeared attached or pulled, its heat signature fading unevenly as the larger shape moved downslope. Something was being carried or taken. Timing comparisons soon connected the recovered segment to another dataset, Ellison's smartwatch telemetry extracted from cloud backup. His device had been configured to sync periodically through a low-bandwidth satellite relay, preserving minute-level heart rate logs even after local signal loss. The data showed a sudden elevation at 8:44 p.m., climbing rapidly for less than 2 minutes before flatlining at 8:46. The moment of peak signal loss overlapped exactly with the extended portion of the new video. His heart had stopped at the exact moment the extra footage ended. To investigators, the correlation was circumstantial, but for online researchers, it became a turning point. The idea that the extra footage aligned with Ellison's last recorded heartbeat implied both events were captured within the same minute. The footage didn't just show what happened, it showed when he stopped running. Within 24 hours of its posting, the second file was removed from the original site for privacy concerns, but duplicates spread immediately across mirror channels. Each re-upload introduced new compression errors, yet the defining sequence, the faint figure dragging weight behind the ridge, remained visible enough to sustain argument. Whether it depicted corrupted pixels or something tangible, its timing and method of appearance transformed the case from an isolated disappearance into a digital mystery. The recovery team moved through the Sol Duke drainage with handheld thermal scanners, mapping every contour of the floodplain. On the 6th day, near a narrowing of the creek, they found an object half buried in mud beneath a fallen branch. It was Ellison's smartwatch, screen cracked, band torn, but GPS module intact. Data extracted from the watch showed a sudden burst of motion beginning at 8:43 p.m., with his heart rate spiking at 8:44 as he covered roughly 200 feet in under a minute before signals stopped. The elevation graph indicated a brief incline, then descent toward the water. Analysts estimated that he had covered the distance in less than 40 seconds before the signal flatlined. 40 seconds of speed, then nothing. Around the same area, investigators documented 2 sets of impressions in the soft soil. One matched standard hiking boots consistent with Ellison's model, size 11. The other appeared parallel, larger, broader, and bare. The second track measured nearly 14 inches from heel to toe, but the shape was uneven, with pressure points unlike a human arch. The prints extended for 3 paces before fading where the mud thinned near gravel. Wildlife biologists from the Department of Fish and Wildlife later examined plaster casts and noted that a bear could produce similar depth under rearing posture. But the stride length, over 5 feet, did not match known locomotion patterns. Biologists noted that while bears can rear briefly, sustained pacing at that stride length was improbable. The impressions showed neither a full quadrupedal gait nor a consistent upright stance, but something intermediate, something that walked beside him, matching him step for step. Despite growing speculation, law enforcement issued no public statements. Search logs made no mention of recovering the missing SD card. Officially, the investigation categorized all unrecovered equipment as having undetermined disposition. By mid-March, the internet divided into factions. One group advanced what they called the human theory, the belief that Ellison's disappearance resulted from a staged scare gone wrong. They argued that another camper or filmmaker had planned a viral prank, misjudged conditions, and triggered a real emergency. But if it was staged, why did the footprints continue past the frame? Opposing them were proponents of the biological theory who treated the event as an authentic encounter with an unidentified species. They cited the temperature inversions in the original file and the stride spacing at the creek as evidence of a large biped adapted for stealth in cold environments. And no one could say who moved the file at 9:03. A third camp, labeled by moderators as the staged upload theory, took a different approach. They suggested that Ellison himself had captured legitimate wildlife footage, but someone else later manipulated or recontextualized it. The 9:03 p.m. modification, they claimed, marked an external actor accessing his account after the fact. These competing narratives generated a wave of open-source data projects. One group of independent analysts pulled IP logs from Mirror archives and discovered an address embedded in the header of the second upload. The IP traced not to Washington, but to a satellite modem registered in Idaho. When cross-referenced with commercial leasing databases, the modem's serial number appeared in a rental invoice issued to a forestry contractor operating in Olympic National Forest earlier that year. The company had returned the unit in January, weeks before Ellison's trip, a recycled connection from equipment that shouldn't have been active. But it was. That discovery reignited claims that someone with professional field access had handled the footage after his disappearance. Digital forensics experts reviewing the trail camera's communication protocol agreed that a remote connection could have initiated upload from any device paired to its cloud credentials. It was plausible, though improbable, that a technician testing residual logins from a recycled modem could have triggered a resync without knowing its content. Or someone knew exactly what they were looking for. While online debates deepened, a new development surfaced in late March. A regional newspaper received an anonymous message from someone claiming to possess unlisted footage from the same night. The sender described being a drone hobbyist testing night sensors several miles south of the Salt Duke drainage. Attached metadata placed the flight path within overlapping airspace at 8:44 p.m., 2 minutes before Ellison's smartwatch signal ended. When the outlet viewed the clip, it showed a faint thermal flare above the canopy, followed by a sudden cold patch moving diagonally through the frame. At 8:44, a new light cut across the canopy. Not bright, cold. There were no visible lights or reflective markers, no indication of human presence. Analysts who later examined screenshots described the object as elongated and vertical, emitting less heat than its surroundings, as if covered in moisture or dense material. A shape moved against the gradient, vertical, silent. The drone's coordinates intersected within roughly 150 feet of Ellison's final smartwatch GPS ping, accounting for expected GPS drift under dense canopy. Within a day of publication, the file vanished. The hosting site replaced the link with a message stating it had been removed for privacy violation. Attempts to verify ownership failed. The account used to upload the footage was deleted, and the original drone operator never came forward. The newspaper printed a brief correction stating that they could not confirm the clip's authenticity. Still, enough viewers had archived it to maintain discussion. The alignment of timestamps, trail camera at 8:41, drone at 8:44, smartwatch at 8:46, formed a triangular chronology that no one could dismiss. 3 devices, 3 timestamps, and nothing after. By early April, official search efforts concluded. Reports described weather degradation, reduced visibility, and low likelihood of recovery. Official reports later summarized 3 confirmed data points, each drawn from separate devices. The trail camera upload at 8:41 p.m., the smartwatch cessation at 8:46 p.m., and the drone telemetry anomaly logged at 8:44 p.m. Beyond those times, every trace ended. There were no confirmed sightings, no physical remains, and no identified suspects. Just silence where a man used to be. When spring arrived, the online focus shifted from search coordination to retrospective analysis. A few persistent archivists built composite maps linking every timestamp and coordinate into an interactive model. The overlap revealed a convergence zone less than 2 acres wide, dense forest floor bordered by drainage slopes, where line of sight dropped abruptly. It was the same valley Ellison had documented years earlier while mapping fire breaks. He'd walked that ground 100 times. But had something else been walking it longer? In June, another anomaly drew attention. Users tracking residual logins to Ellison's accounts noted new activity. Someone had accessed his long-abandoned video page from a masked IP routed through Oregon. The login session lasted less than 10 minutes, but resulted in deletion of all previous uploads except one titled Night Vision Test Number 2. Its upload timestamp predated the disappearance by exactly 2 minutes. Why leave only that one? The surviving clip, less than 10 seconds long, depicted a simple setup, Ellison adjusting the trail camera while testing focus. In the final frame, his reflection appeared faintly on the lens housing. Behind him, deeper in the trees, a dim outline curved across the periphery, slightly delayed in movement as though the reflection and the object behind it were out of sync. The detail went unnoticed for months until frame-stabilized copies circulated through forums. When slowed, the offset became clearer. Ellison's arm lowered first, but the faint silhouette of the same motion lingered a half-beat longer before fading, as if something had been learning how to mirror him and hadn't quite perfected the timing. Investigators declined to comment on the reactivation of his account. The provider confirmed only that the deletion and upload records were genuine and originated from correct credentials. Forensic analysts couldn't determine whether the login came from recovered hardware or a reused credential on another machine, leaving the source of access unresolved. Someone still had his passwords. Someone was still watching his work. By July, the case was formally suspended. The forest had taken everything back. Only the footage remained, clear, silent, watching. The 3 remaining points, the camera, drone, and watch, formed the last measurable chain in a story without closure. Local news moved on, and Moss reclaimed the search site. Online, only fragments survived, mirrored clips, conflicting diagrams, fading threads of speculation. The last trace of Mark Ellison came from a device built to record what passed before it, not what lingered behind. Everything after that was interpretation, pixels, reflections, and data gaps where a person should have been. Maybe something else had been watching him. On September 15, 2021, 26-year-old Jake Morrison set out on what should have been a routine solo backpacking trip through the Olympic National Forest in Washington State. An experienced hiker from Portland, Oregon, Jake had been exploring the Pacific Northwest wilderness for over 8 years, documenting his adventures on his popular YouTube channel, Trail Tales with Jake. What began as a 5-day journey to film content for his 1,000 subscribers would become the most terrifying experience of his life and provide some of the most compelling evidence for Bigfoot's existence ever captured on camera. Jake Morrison wasn't your typical weekend warrior. As a freelance outdoor photographer and content creator, he spent nearly half the year in the wilderness, often alone for weeks at a time. His apartment in Portland was more like a gear storage facility, packed with cameras, camping equipment, and maps of remote trails throughout Oregon and Washington. Friends often joked that Jake was more comfortable sleeping under the stars than in his own bed, and they weren't wrong. The Olympic Peninsula had always held a special fascination for Jake. Its vast expanses of old-growth forest, rugged coastline, and minimal human presence made it perfect for the kind of immersive wilderness content his audience craved. He had hiked sections of the peninsula before, but never attempted the remote Quinault River Trail system that would be his destination for this September trip. Jake's plan was ambitious, but well within his capabilities. He intended to hike 37 miles over 5 days, following the Quinault River deep into the heart of the Olympic wilderness. The trail would take him through some of the most pristine temperate rainforest in North America, past ancient cedar groves and hidden waterfalls that few people ever see. His goal was to document the changing seasons and capture the ethereal beauty of the Pacific Northwest autumn. What Jake didn't know was that the Quinault River Valley had a long history of unexplained encounters. Local Native American tribes, particularly the Quinault Nation, had stories going back generations about the Siatko, large, hairy beings that lived deep in the forest and occasionally revealed themselves to humans. More recently, the area had generated dozens of Bigfoot sighting reports, though most were dismissed by authorities as misidentifications or hoaxes. Jake arrived at the Graves Creek trailhead at 7:30 a.m. on September 15, 2021. The parking area was empty except for one other vehicle, unusual for a Wednesday morning, but not uncommon for such a remote location. He spent 20 minutes organizing his gear and checking his camera equipment, including the GoPro Hero 9 mounted on his chest harness and a handheld Sony A7R4 for still photography. His pack weighed 42 pounds, loaded with 5 days of food, camping gear, and enough camera equipment to document every aspect of his journey. Jake had learned from years of solo hiking that preparation was everything. He carried emergency communication devices, water purification tablets, and enough backup batteries to keep his cameras running for a week. The first day of hiking was exactly what Jake had hoped for. The Quinault River Trail wound through cathedral-like groves of Douglas fir and western red cedar, some over 800 years old. His chest-mounted GoPro captured the dappled sunlight filtering through the canopy while he provided commentary for his future video. Jake's voice was clear on the recording as he paused beside a massive cedar, explaining how you could hike for hours without seeing another person, experiencing just yourself and the forest the way it had been for thousands of years. By 4:15 p.m., Jake had covered 8 miles and reached his planned campsite beside Pony Creek. The location was perfect, a small clearing with access to fresh water and enough flat ground for his ultralight tent. As was his routine, Jake spent the first hour setting up camp and organizing his gear before beginning his evening photography session. It was during this golden hour shoot that Jake first noticed something unusual. While reviewing photos on his camera's LCD screen, he spotted what appeared to be a large, dark shape in the background of several images. The shape was partially obscured by trees and could have been a stump or shadow, but something about it bothered him. Jake muttered to himself about how weird it was, zooming in on the image. The shape seemed too tall and narrow to be a stump, and it appeared in 3 consecutive photos taken from slightly different angles. More puzzling, Jake couldn't remember seeing anything that large when he was composing the shots. As darkness fell, Jake prepared dinner on his lightweight camp stove while his cameras continued recording. He had developed a habit of keeping at least one camera running throughout his trips, partly for content, but mostly for safety. If something happened to him, the footage might help rescuers understand what went wrong. At 9:23 p.m., while Jake was cleaning his cooking gear, his GoPro captured a sound that would haunt him for months afterward. A low, resonant call echoed through the forest, not quite human, but far more complex than any animal vocalization he had heard in 8 years of wilderness camping. The sound lasted about 6 seconds and seemed to come from the direction where he had noticed the strange shape in his photographs. Jake's reaction was immediate and telling. Instead of fear, his first instinct was curiosity. the same trait that had driven him to spend his life exploring remote places. He grabbed his headlamp and Sony camera, switching to video mode as he moved toward the edge of his campsite. He whispered to his camera that he had never heard anything like that before, describing how it sounded almost intelligent. For the next 20 minutes, Jake waited at the edge of his campsite, camera ready, listening for any repeat of the strange call. The forest had gone completely silent. No insects, no small animals moving through the underbrush, nothing. Even the constant sound of Pony Creek seemed muted, as if the entire ecosystem was holding its breath. Jake eventually returned to his tent, but sleep came fitfully. His cameras continued recording throughout the night, capturing several more instances of the mysterious calls. Audio analysis would later reveal that the vocalizations came from multiple directions, suggesting either several creatures or one that was moving around Jake's campsite in a wide circle. Morning brought relief and renewed curiosity. Jake's first task was to review the night's footage, and what he found made his hands shake as he held the camera. At 2:47 a.m., his tent-mounted GoPro had captured a clear image of something moving past his campsite. The figure was upright, easily 7 feet tall, and covered in dark hair. Most remarkably, it moved with deliberate stealth, carefully placing each step to avoid making noise. Jake could barely breathe as he replayed the footage multiple times, realizing that this was actually happening. The creature had passed within 30 feet of Jake's tent, close enough that the camera's night vision mode captured remarkable detail. The figure's proportions were clearly humanoid, but massively built, with arms that hung nearly to its knees and a distinctive sagittal crest visible on top of its head. Most unsettling was the intelligence evident in its movement. This was not a mindless animal, but something that understood it was being watched. Jake's second day of hiking began with a mixture of excitement and apprehension. Part of him wanted to pack up and hike out immediately, but his photographer's instincts and natural curiosity won out. He had potentially captured footage of one of the world's most elusive creatures. He couldn't just walk away. The trail on day 2 led deeper into the wilderness, following the Quinaulta River through increasingly dense forest. Jake's pace was slower than usual as he constantly scanned the trees around him, camera ready for any sign of his mysterious visitor. His commentary became more subdued, reflecting his growing awareness that he was no longer alone in the forest. At 11:30 a.m., while crossing a small tributary creek, Jake made a discovery that confirmed his suspicions. Pressed into the muddy bank were footprints unlike anything he had seen in his years of wilderness travel. The prints measured roughly 16 inches long and 7 inches wide, with clearly defined toe impressions that showed this was no bear or known animal. Jake whispered to his camera as he knelt beside the clearest print, noting that they had been made sometime the night before or early that morning. He observed the depth and estimated that whatever made these tracks had to weigh at least 400 pounds. Jake spent 20 minutes documenting the prints from every angle, using his hiking pole for scale and taking detailed measurements. The tracks showed a clear pattern of bipedal movement, with a stride length that suggested something much larger than a human, but walking upright like one. More disturbing was the direction of the tracks. They paralleled the trail Jake was following, staying about 50 yards back in the dense forest. Whatever had made these prints was following him, staying close enough to observe, but far enough away to remain hidden. The realization that he was being stalked sent a chill down Jake's spine. His 8 years of solo hiking had taught him to trust his instincts, and every instinct was now screaming that he was in potential danger. But he was already 12 miles from the nearest road, with no choice but to continue forward or attempt a dangerous solo retreat through unfamiliar terrain. Jake's afternoon became a psychological battle between fear and fascination. His cameras captured his growing paranoia as he constantly looked over his shoulder, jumped at every sound, and second-guessed every decision. Yet he continued hiking deeper into the wilderness, driven by a combination of stubbornness and the knowledge that he might be documenting something extraordinary. At 3:45 p.m., Jake's stalker made its presence known in a way that left no doubt about its intelligence. While taking a break beside a fallen log, Jake heard the same resonant call from the previous night, but this time it came from directly ahead of him on the trail. When he looked up, a massive figure stood in the path about 100 yards away, partially obscured by the forest shadows, but clearly visible. The creature was even larger than Jake had estimated from the night footage. Standing upright, it appeared to be at least 8 feet tall, with a build that suggested immense strength. Its entire body was covered in dark, coarse hair, and its face, while difficult to see clearly, showed unmistakably intelligent eyes that seemed to be studying Jake as intently as he was studying it. Jake whispered with a shaking voice as he slowly raised his camera, acknowledging that it was real and actually happening. The standoff lasted approximately 30 seconds, long enough for Jake to capture several minutes of video footage that would later be analyzed by experts around the world. The creature showed no signs of aggression, but its posture conveyed a clear message. It was aware of Jake's presence and was choosing to reveal itself. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the figure melted back into the forest with a grace that seemed impossible for something so large. Jake was left alone on the trail, his heart pounding and his hands shaking as he tried to process what he had just witnessed. The encounter changed everything about Jake's trip. What had begun as a routine backpacking adventure had become something far more significant and dangerous. He now knew with certainty that he was sharing the forest with an unknown creature of remarkable intelligence and size. Jake's decision to continue hiking rather than retreat would prove to be both brave and foolish. Over the next 3 days, his mysterious companion would reveal itself repeatedly, always maintaining a careful distance but making its presence unmistakably known. The psychological pressure of being constantly watched by something so powerful began to take its toll. Day 3 brought more direct encounters. Jake's morning routine was interrupted by the sound of heavy footsteps circling his campsite, just beyond the range of his camera's night vision. When he emerged from his tent at dawn, he found that his food bag hung 12 feet high in a tree, according to proper bear safety protocols, had been carefully lowered and placed beside his tent. Nothing was missing, but the message was clear. His stalker could have taken anything it wanted. Jake told his camera that this was getting really weird, his voice tight with stress. He described how it seemed like the creature was trying to communicate or something, but he didn't know what it wanted. The trail on day 3 led through some of the most remote wilderness in the Olympic Peninsula. Jake saw no other hikers, no aircraft overhead, no signs of human presence except the faint path beneath his feet. His isolation was complete, shared only with a creature that seemed to exist outside the boundaries of known science. At midday, while filming a segment about old-growth forest ecology, Jake captured footage that would become some of the most analyzed Bigfoot evidence ever recorded. His handheld camera was focused on a massive cedar when something moved in the background. A dark figure that stepped briefly into view before disappearing behind another tree. The figure was clearly the same creature Jake had been encountering, but this footage showed it in daylight with remarkable clarity. Its human-like posture was unmistakable, as was the intelligence evident in how it used the forest cover to remain mostly hidden while still allowing itself to be seen. Jake realized while reviewing the footage on his camera screen that the creature knew he was filming and was choosing when to show itself. This revelation was both thrilling and terrifying. Jake was documenting behavior that suggested a level of intelligence far beyond what mainstream science attributed to any unknown primate. His stalker wasn't just avoiding humans, it was actively managing its interactions with them. The psychological pressure intensified on day 4. Jake's sleep was constantly interrupted by sounds around his campsite, footsteps, breathing, and occasional vocalizations that seemed designed to let him know he was being watched. His cameras captured glimpses of movement throughout each night, but never enough to provide the definitive proof that would convince skeptics. Jake's commentary became increasingly strained as exhaustion and stress took their toll. He admitted to his camera on the morning of day 4 that he didn't know how much more of this he could take, feeling like he was losing his mind out there. But Jake's ordeal was far from over. Day 4 would bring the most intense encounter yet, one that would test his courage and provide footage that cryptozoologists would study for years to come. The trail on day 4 climbed steadily toward Enchanted Valley, a remote alpine meadow surrounded by towering peaks. As Jake gained elevation, the forest began to thin, providing less cover for his mysterious companion. He hoped this might mean an end to the constant surveillance, but he was wrong. At 2:30 p.m., while crossing an open meadow, Jake heard the now familiar call echoing off the surrounding mountains. But this time, the sound came from multiple directions, at least 3 different sources positioned around the meadow's perimeter. Jake realized with growing alarm that he wasn't being followed by one creature, but by several. He whispered to his camera that there was more than one, slowly turning to scan the tree line and realizing they had him surrounded. The meadow crossing became the longest 10 minutes of Jake's life. He could feel eyes watching him from the forest edge, and his cameras captured several glimpses of large, dark shapes moving between the trees. The creatures were coordinating their movements, staying hidden while maintaining visual contact with their human visitor. Jake reached the far side of the meadow without incident, but the message was clear. He was completely at the mercy of beings that could have overwhelmed him at any time. Their restraint suggested either benevolent intentions or a level of strategic thinking that was deeply unsettling. The final night of Jake's trip brought the most dramatic encounter yet. Camped beside a small alpine lake, Jake was awakened at 3:15 a.m. by the sound of something large moving through his campsite. His tent-mounted camera captured a figure approaching to within 10 feet of where he lay, close enough that he could hear its breathing through the thin nylon walls. The creature stayed beside Jake's tent for nearly 20 minutes, occasionally making soft vocalizations that sounded almost conversational. Jake lay perfectly still, his heart pounding so loudly he was sure the creature could hear it. The footage from that night would later reveal remarkable details about the being's physical characteristics and behavior. When Jake finally worked up the courage to peer through his tent's mesh window, he found himself looking directly into a face that would haunt his dreams for months afterward. The creature's eyes reflected his headlamp's light, showing an intelligence that was unmistakably aware and curious. For several seconds, human and unknown beings studied each other through the thin barrier of the tent wall. Then, as if satisfied with what it had learned, the creature withdrew into the darkness, leaving Jake alone with the knowledge that he had just experienced something that would change his life forever. Jake's final day of hiking was a blur of exhaustion and relief. The creatures that had followed him for 4 days seemed to have withdrawn, perhaps satisfied that he was leaving their territory. His pace was faster than usual, driven by a desperate desire to return to the familiar world of roads and cell phone signals. The Graves Creek trailhead appeared through the trees like a vision of salvation. Jake's truck sat exactly where he had left it 5 days earlier, but he felt like a completely different person from the one who had started this journey. His cameras contained footage that would challenge everything science thought it knew about the wilderness of the Pacific Northwest. Jake's first stop after leaving the trailhead was the Quinault Ranger Station, where he reported his encounters to skeptical but professional park rangers. His footage was copied and forwarded to wildlife biologists and law enforcement agencies, beginning a chain of analysis that would eventually reach the highest levels of government. The drive back to Portland gave Jake time to process what he had experienced. By the time he reached his apartment, he had made a decision that would define the rest of his life. He would dedicate himself to understanding and documenting the creatures he had encountered, regardless of the personal cost or professional ridicule that might follow. Jake's first week back in Portland was a whirlwind of sleepless nights and obsessive video review. He had captured over 40 hours of footage during his 5-day trip, and hidden within that material were dozens of brief glimpses, sounds, and anomalies that painted a picture of intelligence beyond anything he had imagined possible in the wilderness. The clearest footage came from his final night, when the creature had approached his tent. Frame-by-frame analysis revealed details that made Jake's hands shake as he worked at his computer. The being's facial features showed a blend of human and ape characteristics, but the eyes held an awareness that transcended both. When enhanced and slowed down, the creature's vocalizations revealed complex tonal patterns that suggested structured communication. Jake's YouTube channel had always focused on the beauty and solitude of wilderness hiking, but now he faced an impossible decision. Publishing his Bigfoot footage would transform his life in ways he couldn't predict. His credibility as an outdoor educator would be questioned. His peaceful hiking adventures would become media circuses, and he would forever be known as that Bigfoot guy, rather than the serious nature photographer he had worked years to become. But the evidence was too compelling to ignore. Jake had always prided himself on honesty with his audience, and hiding this discovery felt like a betrayal of everything he stood for. After a week of agonizing deliberation, he made his choice. On September 28, 2021, Jake uploaded a video titled, "Something Followed Me for 5 Days in the Olympic Wilderness, Raw Footage." The 43-minute compilation included his clearest encounters, enhanced audio of the vocalizations, and detailed analysis of the footprint evidence. His introduction was simple and direct, explaining that he had been hiking alone in the wilderness for 8 years and had never experienced anything like this. He wasn't asking viewers to believe him, he was just showing them what happened so they could draw their own conclusions. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within 24 hours, the video had been viewed over 100,000 times and generated thousands of comments, ranging from supportive to skeptical to outright hostile. Major news outlets picked up the story, and Jake found himself fielding interview requests from around the world. Dr. Jeffrey Meldrum from Idaho State University was among the first scientists to contact Jake directly. As one of the world's leading experts on Bigfoot evidence, Dr. Meldrum had seen countless hoaxes and misidentifications, but Jake's footage impressed him with its consistency and detail. Dr. Meldrum explained during their first phone conversation that what struck him about Jake's documentation was the behavioral coherence. These weren't random encounters. They showed a pattern of intelligent observation and interaction that was very difficult to fake convincingly. The scientific analysis that followed was more thorough than anything Jake had expected. Audio experts studied the vocalizations, finding harmonic frequencies and structural patterns that didn't match any known North American wildlife. Primatologists analyzed the creature's movement patterns, noting locomotion characteristics that suggested a large bipedal primate adapted for forest environments. Most compelling was the analysis of Jake's footprint casts. Dr. Grover Krantz's former colleagues at Washington State University examined the plaster impressions using techniques developed for forensic investigations. The prints showed dermal ridges, pressure patterns, and anatomical details that would be nearly impossible to fabricate convincingly. But not everyone was convinced. Skeptical organizations like the Committee for Skeptical Inquiry published detailed critiques of Jake's evidence, suggesting alternative explanations ranging from misidentified bears to elaborate hoaxes. The debate raged across social media platforms and academic forums, with Jake caught in the middle of a controversy he had never sought. The attention took a serious toll on Jake's personal life. His girlfriend of 3 years, Sarah, struggled with the sudden media scrutiny and the way their relationship had become secondary to Jake's obsession with his forest encounters. Friends who had once joined him on hiking trips now made excuses to avoid the cameras and questions that followed him everywhere. Sarah told him during one of their final arguments that he wasn't the same person who had left for that trip. It was like those things in the forest had taken away the Jake she fell in love with and left someone else in his place. She wasn't wrong. Jake found himself unable to enjoy simple hikes without constantly scanning the forest for signs of his mysterious watchers. Every shadow could hide a massive figure. Every unusual sound might be an attempt at communication. The wilderness that had once been his sanctuary had become a place of constant vigilance and anticipation. But Jake's dedication to understanding his experience also brought unexpected connections. He began corresponding with other witnesses who had remained silent for years, afraid of ridicule or disbelief. Their stories revealed a pattern of encounters throughout the Pacific Northwest that suggested a stable population of these creatures living in the most remote wilderness areas. Maria Santos, a wildlife biologist from Bellingham, contacted Jake 6 months after his video went viral. She had been conducting unofficial research into Bigfoot sightings for over a decade, documenting reports from credible witnesses including park rangers, wildlife photographers, and experienced outdoors people. Maria explained during their first meeting that Jake's footage corroborated behavioral patterns she had been tracking for years. These creatures seemed to have a complex social structure and territorial behavior that was far more sophisticated than mainstream science acknowledged. Together, Jake and Maria began planning return expeditions to the Olympic Peninsula, using Jake's documented encounter locations as starting points for more systematic research. They installed motion-activated cameras throughout the Quinault River Valley and began collecting environmental DNA samples from water sources where the creatures might drink. The research yielded tantalizing results. Several cameras captured brief glimpses of large, bipedal figures moving through the forest at night. Water samples contained genetic material that didn't match any known species in scientific databases. Most intriguingly, audio recordings revealed complex vocalizations that seemed to represent a form of long-distance communication between different groups. Jake's life had been permanently altered by his 5 days in the Olympic wilderness. His YouTube channel evolved from hiking entertainment to serious cryptozoological research, attracting a global audience of researchers, witnesses, and curious observers. He published a book about his experience, Followed: 5 Days with the Unknown, which became a bestseller in the cryptozoology community. But success came with a price. Jake's relationships suffered under the weight of his obsession, and his mental health struggled with the constant pressure of being a public figure in a controversial field. He began working with a therapist who specialized in trauma recovery, learning to process the psychological impact of his encounters. His therapist, Dr. Rebecca Chen, explained that what he had experienced was a form of contact with an intelligence that existed outside normal understanding. It was natural that such an encounter would fundamentally change how he saw the world and his place in it. 3 years after his original encounter, Jake continues to research and document evidence of Bigfoot in the Pacific Northwest. His work has contributed to a growing body of scientific literature that suggests these creatures may represent a surviving population of ancient hominids that have adapted to life in North America's most remote wilderness areas. The creatures that followed Jake for 5 days in September 2021 remain as mysterious as ever, but their brief interaction with one curious human has opened a window into a hidden world that exists parallel to our own, reminding us that even in our modern age of satellite imagery and GPS tracking, the wilderness still holds secrets that challenge our understanding of what's possible. Jake's story serves as a reminder that sometimes the most profound discoveries come not from seeking them out, but from remaining open to the unexpected encounters that await those brave enough to venture alone into the wild places where mystery still lives.
Wait up.
On June 15, 2015, a mother from Oklahoma called 911, her house torn apart. Doors splintered, massive handprints gouged into the siding, and her daughter attacked. What followed would be one of the most disputed Bigfoot-related disappearances ever on reservation land. Anita Graywolf, 39, was a social worker from Tulsa who had spent most of her life listening to other people's stories and learning how to separate fear from fact. After years in the city, she decided to return with her daughter, Maya, to the family property on the southeastern border of the Cherokee Reservation, a place her grandparents had once warned her never to disturb. For Anita, the move felt like both an escape and a responsibility, to remind her daughter where she came from, unaware that the valley they were returning to had been waiting for them. The land sat beside Hollow Valley, a stretch of forest that Anita remembered only through half-forgotten warnings from her grandparents. The stories she said she knew had always been about the Stone Man, a guardian spirit said to rise when people disturbed the balance of the old ground. Anita had once laughed at those tales. Now, standing in the quiet clearing, she found herself uneasy at how easily the valley swallowed sound. She said that when she announced her plans to stay for the summer, the tribal elders' concern unsettled her more than she admitted. They told her the Stone Man walks when people forget him, and that Hollow Valley remembers what was taken from it. She wanted to believe their tone was ceremonial, but there was something in their eyes that lingered after the conversation ended. She later learned their worry had roots in the past. In the 1950s, a limestone quarry had been cut directly into ground, once used for Cherokee burials and ceremonies. The elders said the land had never settled after that. But was it merely a story meant to preserve respect, or a warning too old to be ignored? Her skepticism would have felt firmer if she had known nothing of the missing person cases that surrounded the valley. For decades, rumors had circulated about disappearances quietly erased from tribal police files. The idea sounded impossible, but something about that absence, what wasn't on paper, bothered her. Why were those records erased, and by whom? By the time she and Maya arrived in early June 2015, Anita said that she was determined to treat the trip as a family experiment rather than a spiritual one. She had no reason to think the valley would challenge her sense of what was real. Maya, eager for a project, began recording interviews with elders for what she called a folklore study. Anita mentioned to investigators that she encouraged it, proud of her daughter's initiative. The drawings Maya made afterward, tall figures covered in moss with eyes like polished stone, struck Anita as creative exaggerations. So why did Maya's drawings start to match what others had described decades earlier? When Maya reviewed her recordings, she mentioned a faint pulsing sound that repeated through every clip filmed near the tree line. Anita assumed it was interference, maybe a faulty microphone. Later analysis by others would suggest the frequencies resembled those produced by large mammals, but at the time, Anita dismissed it without hesitation. The first thing she couldn't dismiss came from the dogs. They refused to cross the clearing that bordered the forest, bracing their legs and whining whenever she tried to lead them forward. Even food couldn't persuade them. Their bodies went rigid, muscles trembling, eyes fixed on the dark edge of the trees, as though something waited just beyond sight. Anita compared this animal reaction to what she had seen in trauma survivors: instinctive, unreasoned, absolute. She wrote it off at first as a remnant of travel stress, but over the next 2 days, the dogs grew worse, pacing the porch at night and refusing to leave the steps, even to relieve themselves. On June 8th, she and Maya began hearing slow, deliberate impacts from the direction of the valley. 3 strikes, always in sequence, then silence. The sound was heavy, like wood on wet earth, each blow separated by an unnatural stillness. Anita kept count in a small notebook, treating each sound like a case note, noting the intervals and time of day. Sometimes the noises came after dusk, other times at dawn when the air was completely still. She wondered if stress or isolation had made her hypersensitive to noise, but the dogs would react first, heads lifting moments before she heard it. 4 days later, Maya filmed a short interview with her on the porch, a casual talk about family heritage and why they'd returned. The atmosphere felt peaceful, though Anita noticed the quiet had changed in a subtle way, the absence of birds, the stillness of leaves. She remembered the light that afternoon, bright, steady, the woods behind her unmoving in the heat. Maya had laughed easily, asking about old stories their grandmother used to tell. Everything about that hour seemed ordinary until later that night when Maya replayed the footage. When she did, she froze. At the 18-minute mark, behind where Anita had been sitting, a tall figure stood between the trees. It did not move. The shape was dark, featureless but clearly solid, the upper outline distinct against the lighter canopy. Anita thought it might have been a shadow at first, some play of light through shifting branches, but the figure remained fixed while the camera trembled slightly in Maya's hands. Frame-by-frame review showed it remained visible for nearly 4 minutes before vanishing between one frame and the next. By tree measurements, it stood more than 8 feet tall. Its limbs appeared long, almost disproportionate, the posture too upright for a bear and too broad for a man. Anita watched the footage twice, then a third time, unable to decide whether she was seeing a trick of light or the shape the elders had warned about. The one said to appear first at a distance, always watching, never retreating. She turned off the laptop and told Maya to delete the file, but by then it had already been copied to her phone. The question that lingered after the screen went dark wasn't what it was. Investigators later asked, how does something that large vanish in a single frame? According to reports, word of Maya's footage spread quickly through the tribal community, reaching Anita before she was ready to face the attention it brought. 2 Cherokee police officers arrived the next afternoon, requesting copies of the recording. Anita watched them move methodically through the property, examining the area where the figure had stood. They pointed to the impressions in the soft earth near the tree line, indentations she had stepped around for days without realizing their significance. Plaster casts were made of several 16-inch footprints that revealed a strange, asymmetrical gait. Anita noticed how the impressions sank deeply at both heel and toe, suggesting something heavy yet balanced, as though whatever made them could move with its full weight upright. The stride between each print measured nearly 4 feet. To her, it looked like a pattern that belonged to neither man nor bear, but something that walked like both. Despite the documentation, the casts were gone within days. Anita learned that Wildlife Management had taken possession of them, though she did say that she never saw any paperwork confirming that transfer. When she later asked for the case number, the files had already disappeared from the record. What remained were Maya's photographs, the only proof that the prints had existed at all. That night, the rhythmic knocking resumed. Anita marked 3 distinct impacts in her notebook, followed by a deep, dragging exhalation that seemed to press through the bedroom wall. It was the first time she admitted to herself that she was frightened, though she forced her mind to frame it as data. Something to be cataloged, not feared. The disturbances were escalating. Anita felt a growing certainty that their arrival had disrupted something old and watchful, something that had waited for acknowledgement. The Stone Man legend was no longer folklore whispered by elders. It was pressing against her reality. By the second week of June, the property had taken on the atmosphere of a siege. The nighttime sounds followed a strict schedule every night between 2:45 and 3:10. Anita said that she would wake to 3 heavy knocks from different sides of the house, then silence, then guttural calls that vibrated through the walls with physical force. She documented each sequence, her digital recorder filling with data she could neither explain nor dismiss. When wildlife officers arrived to analyze the recordings, their report only deepened her confusion. The sounds matched no known species in the region and registered at decibel levels, suggesting immense lung capacity. One officer remarked that the calls appeared to be directed toward the Gray Wolf residence, as if in response to something within it. Anita replayed that observation in her head for nights afterward, wondering if something in the valley recognized them specifically. But if it wanted contact, why did it never approach openly? Alongside the sounds came an odor so pungent it seemed alive, a mixture of wet earth and decomposition that saturated the air and vanished at sunrise. Anita noted its presence during every nocturnal disturbance. Maya, increasingly distressed, began sleeping with towels under her door to block the smell, complaining that it caused nausea and headaches. On June 12th, Anita told investigators that she found the chicken coop destroyed at dawn. The wooden frame had collapsed inward, boards splintered, but unmarked by claw or bite. There were no tracks in the surrounding dirt, no drag signs, no sign of struggle. The chain-link fencing had been crushed from above as if something immense had dropped onto it. The force required to break the wooden posts at ground level seemed beyond any natural animal. Yet the scene bore no mechanical evidence, no tire marks, no tool impressions. The 6 chickens lay arranged in a straight line 20 feet from the coop. Each neck was broken cleanly, the bodies otherwise untouched. Anita stood over them for several minutes, struck by the absence of chaos. Whatever had done this, it had acted with purpose. 3 days later, during a survey of the property line, she noticed several mature oaks near the abandoned quarry, stripped of bark in clean vertical lines reaching 8 feet up the trunks. The sap was still fresh. When forestry officials inspected the damage, they found no evidence of tools. The bark had been removed in single, fluid motions that implied immense leverage or precision. Reports from nearby ranchers followed the next morning. Deer carcasses had begun appearing in semicircular patterns across the valley, all facing the forest. Anita noted how consistent the arrangement sounded, deliberate, almost ceremonial. The animals showed no sign of disease or predation, their bodies unmarked and intact. Veterinary exams revealed no physiological cause of death. The symmetry of it unsettled her more than the images themselves. Who or what had arranged them with such deliberate symmetry? Technological interference intensified as the pattern continued. Trail cameras deployed by wildlife officers failed within a day, their storage cards corrupted or blank. One managed to capture 6 seconds of usable footage before malfunctioning. When Anita reviewed the clip at the tribal office, she saw a massive silhouette pass close to the lens, so near that the frame blurred from motion. The shape filled the entire shot, yet no features could be discerned. Watching it, she felt the same weight in her chest she had felt that first night, the sense that something vast was studying them in return. The silhouette footage became a point of fixation for researchers, but for Anita, it was something far worse, a confirmation that what had been circling their property had form and intent. Frame-by-frame analyses circulated among cryptozoology circles, showing what appeared to be a bipedal figure of immense proportion with an unnatural gait. She watched those frames repeatedly, noting how the creature seemed to pause and turn toward the camera before the image collapsed into static, as though it had known it was being observed. Anita's documentation changed with that realization. Her once clinical notes, precise and organized, began to unravel into chaotic bursts of handwriting. The early entries were still careful: times, durations, temperature readings, notes about light and sound direction. By mid-June, her writing had become fragmented and urgent, whole lines underlined in heavy strokes, some entries reduced to single declarative phrases written in all capitals, the handwriting trembling with exhaustion and dread. The entry, dated June 14th, stood out most starkly in her own recollection. "It knows we're watching. The sounds are getting closer." Maya drew another picture. Today, how does she know what it looks like? She had not intended to write in that tone, but by then she said that her thoughts had ceased to feel like her own. Maya's sketches were growing disturbingly detailed. Anita noticed the anatomical precision in her daughter's depictions. The elongated limbs, the vast chest, the strange curvature of the shoulders. The eyes in the drawings seemed to hold the page, pale and deliberate, as if some shared vision had guided the pencil. Maya had never seen the creature directly, yet her renderings captured something that made Anita's stomach tighten whenever she looked too long. Anita began to believe the creature was asserting itself, responding to their presence. It moved with deliberation, leaving signs and signals that felt territorial. The Gray Wolf property had become the center of a confrontation decades in the making, and Anita sensed they were now a part of whatever unfinished pattern the valley had been holding. By June 13th, the boundary between observation and participation had dissolved completely. They were no longer witnesses. They were being engaged. The rhythmic pounding that had once seemed distant now shook the entire structure, causing light fixtures to sway and glass to hum in the window panes. Electrical power failed in unison with the pounding, as though each impact drained the air and current at once. The darkness that followed was total, broken only by the pulse of sound surrounding the house in coordinated patterns. But how could something that large perform those without leaving tracks? Her skepticism collapsed quietly rather than dramatically. She now slept on the couch facing the entryway, a claw hammer resting beside her. She positioned herself between the door and Maya's room, sleeping only in short intervals, ears trained on every shift in the wind. Each thud outside felt calculated, as if the thing circling them was not just testing boundaries, but studying them. Maya changed with the pattern of nights. She spoke less, drew more. Her notebooks filled with sequences of the same towering figure, sometimes at the edge of the woods, sometimes half obscured by branches, always turned toward the house. Her focus became unnervingly precise. She would stay awake for hours sketching in silence, her pencil tracing shapes Anita could almost hear. When the wildlife biologists arrived, Anita's hope returned for the first time in weeks. A 3-person team from the Department of Conservation, led by Dr. Ellis Crane, set up on her porch, their confidence measured and professional. Maya recorded the session for her project, while Anita presented her notes, her tone steady as she explained each incident. The destroyed coop, the stripped trees, the symmetrical animal carcasses. She placed her journal before them, offering data she had spent sleepless nights compiling, hoping science might impose structure on the chaos. The scientists' response struck her harder than the knocking ever had. Their calm detachment felt rehearsed. Dr. Crane mentioned isolation hysteria, describing how sensory deprivation could distort perception. His colleague, Dr. Leora Vance, spoke of bacterial infections and environmental contamination, though she admitted that all samples tested clean. Their dismissal of the electromagnetic failures drew the faintest smile from Crane, as though the notion itself insulted his expertise. To Anita, the condescension felt colder than disbelief. That night, their team established a base camp half a mile from the Gray Wolf house. Anita watched their lights fade behind the trees, the equipment glinting under the beam of their headlamps. Motion sensors, infrared rigs, field recorders, electromagnetic detectors arranged with precision and purpose. They moved with the confidence of people who still believed the world was explainable. At 2:30 in the morning, Anita awoke to the sound of static from her handheld radio, followed by a burst of overlapping transmissions. The interference grew dense, layered with low-frequency vibrations that made the walls tremble. Later reports confirmed that the biologists' instruments had all triggered at once: motion sensors, EMF readers, and infrared cameras detecting massive simultaneous movement within a 200-yard radius. The last thing Anita heard before the transmission died was Dr. Crane's voice, distorted by interference, describing something enormous moving between their tents. The signal dissolved into a roar of white noise, leaving the radio silent in her hands. At dawn, tribal police and emergency teams reached the scientists' camp. Anita saw the overturned field truck before they did, half sunk into the clearing. The vehicle had been flipped onto its roof, the frame collapsed inward as though pressed by unimaginable weight. The metal bore deep, rounded impressions, marks that no known tool or natural event could explain. Standing in the wreckage's shadow, Anita understood that whatever had come for them was still nearby, and that its interest had not faded with the night. The 3 biologists were found unconscious but uninjured, approximately 100 yards from their destroyed vehicle. Anita never saw the moment they were discovered, only the aftermath, their faces pale under the emergency floodlights, their movements sluggish and uncertain. They had been lucky, she thought, though none of them looked it. All 3 suffered from mild hypothermia and temporary memory loss, unable to recall anything beyond the stroke of midnight. Their expensive scientific equipment was strewn across the forest like discarded bones, some pieces embedded in tree trunks 20 feet above ground, as if thrown there by impossible force. Dr. Crane's infrared camera, retrieved by deputies, had captured 47 seconds before dying. Anita watched the playback on a deputy's tablet, numb as the thermal image revealed a towering bipedal shape crossing the campsite at 1:11 in the morning, 8, maybe 9 feet tall. Its heat signature fluctuated strangely, pulsing in uneven waves that no one could explain. She thought of the rhythmic knocking on her own walls, of the heavy breath she sometimes swore she could feel through the floorboards. The creature's heat map glowed and then vanished, replaced by static. Dr. Crane refused to return to Hollow Valley afterward. Anita read his report days later, a single sterile paragraph recommending that the area be closed to researchers. No one mentioned what else might live there. The silence that followed was worse than ridicule. It was abandonment. Back at the Grey Wolf house, the fallout from the scientists' retreat pressed down like a physical weight. Anita understood finally that no one would help them. The decision to leave was immediate, but Maya's plea for one more day, just one more recording, cut deep. She said she was close to proving it existed. Anita had no words left to argue. Against everything maternal in her, she agreed to stay. That night, the smell grew unbearable. It wasn't rot anymore, but something acidic, almost manufactured, seeping through the walls until their eyes burned. Anita sealed every window, dragged furniture against the doors, and refused to step outside. Even the dogs seemed hollowed out, lying together in silence, their ribs trembling with each breath. The air inside the house felt heavy, charged with the same pressure that came before lightning. She could feel it watching, waiting. By June 15th, the valley had turned hostile. Weather alerts warned of severe electrical storms and potential tornadic activity, but Anita barely heard them. She spent the day packing methodically, forcing her hands to move even as static hissed through every device. Radios spat nonsense, cell signals dissolved into bursts of interference. The air smelled of metal. When the storm hit at 9:37, it sounded like the sky tearing apart. Lightning strobed through the windows, each flash revealing the motionless dogs, the trembling curtains, the outline of the forest beyond. At 9:47, the grid failed. Darkness swallowed the property. Then came the knocking, not the scattered taps of previous nights, but a full assault, measured, powerful, deliberate. The house shuddered as though gripped by unseen hands. Anita felt the floor flex beneath her feet, dishes clattering from shelves, window panes vibrating in rhythm. Somewhere deep inside the structure, something answered each strike with a groan of wood under strain. She grabbed the phone, fighting static, her voice barely rising above the noise. The dispatcher would later note the time, 9:47 and 32 seconds, and the garbled fragments of what she said. The connection pulsed with distortion, each syllable smeared by interference. Anita remembered hearing movement in Maya's room and a heavy step outside, close, circling. The power surged once, flickered, and died. Then that freight train sound roared overhead, a force of wind or something else pressing against the walls. She tried again to speak. The voice that emerged didn't sound like hers. She said something was shaking the house, that Maya was inside, that it was here. The call ended abruptly. Dispatch marked it at 9:49 and 4 seconds, when lightning hit the ridge, blinding white and final. By the time rescuers arrived after midnight, the storm had broken. The door hung open, rain sweeping through the rooms. Furniture lay overturned, glass scattered like salt. Anita's awareness of that night would later fracture into fragments. The smell of ozone, the static still humming in her teeth, and the silence that followed. Outside, they found the tracks. Maya's small footprints running from the porch into the woods, pressed deep into the mud as though each step had been forced by something close behind. The stride length made no sense for a child. Anita would replay that image forever, those tiny prints vanishing into the trees, chased by something that left only enormous symmetrical impressions on the earth. The search dogs refused to follow. They approached the ridge, then froze, whining and trembling until their handlers dragged them back. Whatever waited beyond that line, even the animals understood they were not meant to cross. The trail ended at a rocky outcropping half a mile from the house, and Anita knew the search was over long before anyone said it. Maya's footprints simply stopped, pressed deep into the soft earth, and then gone, as if the ground itself had swallowed her. There were no signs of a fall, no scuff marks, no drag lines. The larger impressions, the ones that followed, continued for another 50 yards before vanishing on hard stone. She studied the ground until her vision blurred, unable to understand how something that heavy could stop leaving tracks. The official search expanded quickly after that. Helicopters circled overhead, their rotors beating over the valley, while search teams spread through the forest with bright vests and radios that crackled through static. 50 volunteers joined in, calling her daughter's name over and over into the trees. The sound echoed strangely, as if the valley itself refused to return it. For 6 days they searched, through rising heat, rain, and the chemical smell that seemed to linger even after the storm passed. No one found a single trace of Maya beyond that ridge. When the state officials arrived with their reports and explanations, their words barely registered. They said the storm had caused disorientation. They said the terrain was dangerous and that Maya must have fallen somewhere unseen. Anita listened but felt detached from everything, like the conversation was taking place in another room. On June 21, 2015, the search was officially ended. The paperwork said, "Death by misadventure," but Anita could still smell the sour electricity in the air and the damp soil where the prints had stopped. After the searchers left, the silence of Hollow Valley grew unbearable. Anita stayed behind, unable to leave the ridge where the trail ended. She built a small camp from what remained of their supplies, a plastic tarp and the remnants of the storm shelter. Locals later said they saw her wandering at dawn, moving quietly among the trees, keeping watch as if waiting for something to return. She marked each passing night by the sound of distant knocking that no one else seemed to hear. The cold didn't matter. The hunger didn't matter. The ridge had become the last place her daughter existed, and she couldn't abandon it. 3 weeks later, she was found by a county patrol officer, dehydrated and barely conscious. They said she resisted evacuation, insisting she needed to stay where the ground broke off. She was transported to Eastern State Hospital in Veneta, placed under observation in a quiet ward with sealed windows and soft lighting. Investigators visited her frequently in those first days, hoping to piece together what had happened in the woods, but her answers only deepened their confusion. The diagnosis was written in careful medical language, acute stress reaction with psychotic features. But the doctors never understood what she had seen or what she was still listening for at night when she refused to sleep. 5 years passed before anyone found anything tangible. In the summer of 2020, hikers moving through an unmarked section of Hollow Valley discovered skeletal remains scattered near a dry creek bed, over a mile from where the original search had ended. The bones were light, almost bleached by time, and the earth around them had hardened into pale clay. DNA confirmed what Anita had already known since the night of the storm. The remains belonged to Maya Graywolf. The announcement brought no comfort, only the final confirmation that the valley had taken her child and then returned her as proof. The official record lists the case as unresolved, death by misadventure, circumstances undetermined. The language is cautious, bureaucratic, meant to close a file. But the evidence remains. Those impossible tracks, the magnetic interference, the shape burned into a camera's memory. In Anita's mind, the valley still breathes. What happened there was never meant to be explained by the kind of people who write reports. Thanks for watching. Want to watch more? Click on your screen now.